Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here and welcome back to the railway. What looks like a Stanier Black 5 but is not a Stanier Black 5? Well, that's what I'm looking at today. Today's loco then is this. It's made by Bachmann and it is the Stanier Mogul. And I always get this confused between the Black 5. I see it on the shelf, I think I need a Black 5, I'll pick this thing up. But it's not a Black 5. The Black 5 was of course a 460, a 10-wheeler, whereas this is a Mogul, a 260. And I'd never heard of the Stanier Mogul when I bought this model about 5 years ago. And the reason is they're extremely obscure engines. In real life they were pretty obscure because they were built 1 year before Stanier introduced the Black 5 and they were perfectly successful, nothing wrong with them at all. But then the Black 5 was introduced and that was wildly successful and they started building those instead of these and no more of these were produced. But this is also an obscure loco in model form as well. It was released by Bachmann in 2017 after a massively long development cycle, and they only produced 3 different variants of it. And after that, this model, as far as I know, has not been back to Bachmann's range since. So an obscure model both in real life and in model form, and to me, that makes this very interesting. So we're going to take a fresh look at this today, see what this is like. In terms of the price, the full RRP for this, at the time I bought it, about 5 years ago, was £159.95, and I paid £106 for it, so very reasonable by today's standards. But what is this like? Is it up to today's standards, and should Bachmann bring this model back? Conversely, is this model dated now? Is it too basic for Bachmann to bring back? Is this something we don't want to see return? Well, today we're going to find out. So it's quite an interesting time to take a fresh look at this because of course Hornby have just released their new Black 5 loco this year, and as much as obviously this is not a Black 5, it is quite similar, so I will be interested to see how this compares with Hornby's Black 5 in terms of the kind of build quality, the features, and also the level of detail. So we'll look at all of that as we get into this. For now though, let me show you which one I went for. So I went for 31-690, that's one of the 3 Bachmann released. It is the Stanier Mogul number 2965 in the LMS lined black, and this is DCC ready with a 21-pin socket. And if I show you the back of the box, you can see we've got a bit of background on the Stanier Mogul itself. Pause and read that if you'd like to, although I will give you a bit of background on these in just a second. For now though, let's get this out and let's revisit this loco. It's been absolutely ages since I reviewed it and a very long time since I last ran it on the channel as well. So yeah, I've almost entirely forgotten what this one's like. But there it is, looking quite Stanier-esque, isn't it? It does look a lot like a Black 5, especially when the front end's kind of concealed by the packaging there. But yeah, let's open this up. Let's take that blister pack out and we'll take a look at the instructions. Alright, so Class 5, see it's even a Class 5, Stanier Mogul Locomotive Owner's Info. So the whole front page here is dedicated to accessories, and as you can see there's absolutely loads for you to fit here, and there's a little key at the bottom. So there's drain corks, we've got a screw link coupling included, wind deflectors, second cab windows, absolutely tons of choice with this. Let's open it up and see what's inside. More accessories, brake rigging, speaker enclosure, etc. Look, we've got fireman's tools apparently. I'll show you the accessories in just a second. Lubrication, so we've got the lubrication points on the axles and the crank pins. Motor bearing lubrication. So as you can see, getting access to the chassis is a bit of a pain because you've got to disconnect the tender first, then remove the body. And there's a look at the mechanism. So it seems like a pretty old-fashioned Bachmann style mechanism to say this was 2017. So typical looking Bachmann motor with no flywheel by the looks of things. I'll look at all this in just a second. DCC decoder socket in the tender. If you want to add sound, by the looks of it, you've got to remove the tender weights in order to accommodate the speaker. Yeah, that's not great, is it? I think Bachmann have come a long way over the past few years, because these days they'd be fitting speakers for you, spare parts warranty, etc, etc. Alright, now I already spied the hefty accessories pack in the top, so let's pull that out. Yeah, there's absolutely loads with this model. Yeah, look at all this. So we've got that kind of coal guard that goes around the top of the tender. We've got all the brake rigging, speaker enclosure with the screws for it, the extra cab windows, the screw link couplings, cylinder drain corks, none of this painted, all in black as you'd expect. And also, yeah, the fireman's tools, shovels and pokers, that kind of thing. I really like to see that actually, because you can place them on the tender and it just adds that bit of extra realism, particularly if you're going to add a crew as well. But yeah, loads and loads of optional extras in there. Well, let's take a look at the loco then, because 2017, that's not that long ago. I reckon Bachmann were producing pretty decent finishes as long ago as that. So let's see what this one's like. Let's open this up. Yeah, it's pretty good, that. I don't know if that comes across. Yeah, it's not a super glossy finish or anything, but I would say it is just about satin. Nice bit of shine on the boiler at least there. Yeah, it looks quality. I will say that. It looks quality. And there's a lot of shine to the coal load, noticeably. Yeah, that's a metal one, as is the case normally with Bachmann. Anyway, let me lift this up for you. Oh, it's heavy. Goodness. It really, really is heavy. So that is a great first impression, isn't it? When you lift up a loco and you think, God blimey, that's heavy. It's very, very impressive. And yeah, the running plate here is metal. So that gives it weight, it makes it sturdy, makes it feel quality. That's really, really good. And I will be interested to know whether this is heavier or not than Hornby's new Black 5, because it was certainly cheaper. But yeah, it's really, really cool, isn't it? The sort of bottom half is like a huge crab, whereas the top half is like a smaller Black 5. Very unusual to look at, especially if you're really used to seeing Black 5s, which of course most of us are. So I really like this. Yeah, I think it's an interesting model, and we'll take a much closer look at this and some of its details and features in just a second. But first of all, here's a little bit of background on the Stanier Moguls in real life. Like I was saying, Stanier's LMS Mogul was introduced the year before the famous Black 5 in 1933. They were far less numerous than the Black 5s though, with only 40 produced. Incidentally, there was over 800 Black 5s built in total. The class was essentially an updated version of the Hughes Crab 260s, but now with a higher boiler pressure, tapered boilers and several other features brought over from the Great Western by William Stanier, who had only recently started working for the LMS. The locomotives were perfectly adequate, and they were classified as a 5P or a 4F, meaning they were reasonably powerful. As we know though, the following year, Stanier would of course introduce the legendary Black 5, which was unbelievably successful, and following this, no more of these Moguls were built. Of the 40 produced in total, withdrawal took place between 1963 and 1967, and while one example does survive today under preservation, the rest sadly were scrapped. So here it is, an up-close look at the Bachmann Stanier Mogul, and this is a beautiful model. Yeah, it's very well presented, I think, but that's not what I like the most about it. It is, for me, the quality of this model that kind of makes this stand out from others, maybe, that I've reviewed. Yeah, the moment I held this in my hands, it was obvious what a sort of heavy and well-built thing this really is. And I have put it on the scales, and it weighs loads. So it weighs in at 382 grams, which is a lot more than Hornby's new Black 5. Yeah, Hornby's new Black 5 is more than 20 grams lighter than this, and this is the smaller engine. It's got a much shorter boiler on it. And let me tell you, when you pick up a small engine and then you find that there are larger engines that are lighter than it, you can really, really tell. In fact, I picked the Hornby Black 5 up after I'd picked this up, and it felt feather light, even though there's only 20 or so grams in it. But it makes a lot of difference, and if you've got both of these engines, do the same thing and you'll see what I mean. So yeah, that die-cast metal running plate is really thick and chunky, and it's brought a lot of extra weight to this model. Okay, well, visually this is a great looking model, I think, but it is missing some of the newer and fancier features that we tend to see these days. Not a complaint, of course, because this isn't a brand new model, but there are one or two things that I miss. The main thing is the matte finish to the smoke box area. Now again, this is not a complaint because we've only just started seeing matte finished smoke boxes over this past year or so. It seems that they've only just thought of doing that. But on older models like this, I do kind of notice it now. Never did before, but I do find myself missing it. I think a bit of a matte finish to a smoke box, particularly on a plain black loco like this, can make a lot of difference to the realism. Other flashy features it's missing are sort of lamps. Obviously it doesn't have those, and there's no lighting of any kind in the cab as well. Again, you do start to miss these things when new releases tend to have them. Other than that though, yeah, it's a really nicely presented loco. So it is in a pretty plain black livery, and these were only ever painted in black, so you won't find them in another colour. But obviously that isn't to say there's no decoration involved here. So like I say, the finish is okay. I think we've seen more satin finishes than this on other models, but it's certainly not too bad. And there's a fair amount of lining around the boiler and smoke box join. The running plate is fully lined, and that's been done well. Cylinders picked out as well, I like the look of that. And of course the side of the cab is very, very nicely presented with all of that lining, and of course the classification and the running number printed onto the side there. So decoration looking really good. There has been an issue with the builder's plate here. This was not me, it was like this when I got it. Seems to be a bit of a glue splodge on there, which is really surprising from Bachmann. Not something we see too often, and certainly the rest of this model is pretty much fine, I think. It's just that there, which is a shame. Detail wise though, let's start from the bottom. Yeah, just great looking wheels. Loads of detail to them, and they are cast metal, so they've got that kind of metal look to them. Great finish. Coupling and connecting rods all look great. These really don't look too Black 5-esque, do they? They look a lot more crabby, if that makes sense. A lot more like the Hughes crab, but very nicely modelled nevertheless. Buffer beams pretty bare from the factory really. I assume they do that so that the front pony and its coupling don't foul against them, but obviously you can fit accessories if you want to. It does have the metal buffers fitted though, although these are not sprung. So again, that's another feature that this is kind of missing. And of course, sprung buffers were the norm back when this was released. So pity about that. And this was not a cheap model. You know, £160 was the full price back then. That was pretty much on the top end for something like this. So strange not to see that. We do have the lamp brackets pre-fitted though, and a pretty detailed smoke box door, although I do kind of look at that smoke box door handle and think that looks a bit chunky, doesn't it? What do you reckon? Yeah, it's not as fine as some we've seen. Separately fitted handrail here as well, and also a lamp bracket. More handrails along the side of the boiler here. Nicely fitted these actually, and they are made of wire. Quite a bit of separately fitted pipework across the boiler and firebox as well. Very nicely produced. Separately fitted reverser rod here as well, which I think might be metal, but it has been blackened. And here's some of the detailing along the running plate. The running plate itself is nicely riveted, and then there's quite a bit of detail just beneath the boiler there. The top of the boiler is very nicely presented. There is a very slightly noticeable seam line on the top there, but it has been polished so that it's not too noticeable. Then we've got the chimney, which appears to be a part of the moulding, so that's a good fit. The dome, I think, could be a separate piece. I think it is, but again, it's a very, very good fit. Better, actually, than we've seen from Bachmann in more recent years. And then the safety valves are turned metal. They look really good quality as a result. In terms of the cab, we've got some very, very nicely done flush glazing here. That looks great, although the vent on top of the cab is fixed in position. So yeah, I would say it is missing a few of your fancy features, even for the time, really. The cab's got a separately fitted metal tender full plate, which is hinged. And here is the cab interior detail, which I don't know. I mean, I haven't got a photo of the Stanier Mogul's cab, but I just think this looks a little bit chunky. Are the pipes really that large? Yeah, I don't think the fidelity of the moulding is as good in the cab as it is elsewhere on the model. And I think looking at more recent releases from other manufacturers and even Bachmann, we do see better cabs than this. But it is nicely painted, and the pipework colouring is pretty good, but there's no paint on the gauges, and like I mentioned earlier, no firebox lighting. So yeah, not a brilliant cab really. The tender though, I really do like. It's a very slim tender, a little bit like the one on the Crab. Not sure, but it might even be the same thing. Let me know if you know. Nicely decorated as always from Bachmann, LMS lettering looking nice and crisp, and the lining looks good as well. The underframe is well detailed. We've got some nice crisp moulding around the axle boxes and such. No brake rigging fitted from the factory, but you can fit it if you want to, and there is even a water scoop between the frames there. On the front end, we've got lots of moulded detail plus some separately fitted controls, and up on the top you've got the metal die-cast coal load, which weighs the tender down quite nicely, and of course you've also got those coal rails that you can fit if you want to. And then around the back, a few more decorated effects here. We've got the tender builder's plate, I believe, and also another plate referring to the capacity. Separately fitted metal handrails, that's good to see. And we've got separate steps, lamp brackets, and on the rear buffer beam, the vacuum pipe has been fitted, as well as the NEM coupling here, which is gently pivotable. Still, no sprung buffers though on the tender either. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what this model's like, and actually I think this is just in the right spot. It didn't cost too much. I mean, I'm sure it would cost more if it was re-released today, but £106, looking at that, knowing today's prices, seems very, very fair for this, and it's the kind of model I'd like to see more of. A lot of the fancy features have been stripped back, the sprung buffers, the kind of lighting in the cab, working lamps, all this other stuff. All of that's gone, and we've got a good looking model which looks fine without any frills and didn't cost too much either. I think there's a lot to be said for models like this, to be honest. And I love my sprung buffers, I love the fancy features, I love all of that, but of course you do end up paying quite dearly for them, and with prices being the way they are these days, I kind of find myself leaning more towards models like this that are very well detailed, well built, but they don't have all the superfluous extras, which are fun, but a little bit difficult to afford. But anyway, let's get this down onto the track, let's see what the performance is like, and of course let's hook this up to a train and see what it looks like with a load. So there she is down onto the track, looking pretty good actually. I mean, I really like Moguls, and also the fact that this is a touch shorter than the Black 5 just gives it a really kind of attractive character, I think. Anyway, I'll show you the performance in just a second, but first let's talk about the mechanism, which I think is a bit of a mixed bag. There's quite a bit of good in this, quite a bit of not so good as well. So some of the tender wheels do have pickups, so as you can see we've got wiper pickups going to the axles here, but it is only some of the tender wheels. The centre wheel set doesn't have any pickups, but at least it's got tender pickups. And of course the loco driving wheels also have wiper pickups on them as well. So we've got a fair number of pickups on this, 5 pickups per rail. Yeah, that's not too bad. It does, however, have an absolutely awful drawbar design. This is your typical Bachmann drawbar, probably the worst in the industry, let's be honest. This one's really annoying because it just disconnects every time you move the loco, but it's not always obvious that it's disconnected because the wires hold the two together. So you could be pulling a train solely by the wires and not know it. Yeah, it's just not a good design. Also, for some reason, the plug is located behind the front set of wheels, and the messy nest of wires has to go beneath that axle. And as you can see, those wires do stop that axle from turning properly. Why they do that, I don't know, but there's quite a few Bachmann locos that are like this. In terms of the loco base keeper though, this is held on with 4 screws and you don't have to remove the front pony in order to get this off. And the base keeper is hardwired, but it's hardwired at the back so that you can lever the base off quite easily, which gives you access to the pickups for cleaning and also the axles for servicing as well. And as you can see, we do have proper separate bearings on this loco. A lot of Bachmann locos at this time did not have the bearings. I think 2017 is really where we started to see Bachmann do this more often. So that's great to see. Nice simple drive on this. It's just driven by a single axle, the centre one there. So nice and simple. I did want to see if I could remove the body without having to disconnect the tender as the instructions showed. And yeah, I found that you can do. So there's a screw at the front beneath the front pony, and then there's a rear screw, and with that out, you can lift the chassis out slightly, pop the drawbar out the back, and then the body is free to be removed. And as you can see, this is an extremely bare bones chassis. It's got no extra features or lights or anything like that. It's just a motor and the drive. And the motor, unfortunately, is just your very basic 3-pole motor without a flywheel. Again, for 2017, this is a bit naff because we've got Hornby locos with 5-pole motors since the early 2000s. So yeah, pity that this is so bare bones, and the fact that this is just a 3-pole motor does show through a fair bit in the performance. In terms of DCC fitting this then, obviously you need to open up the tender, and this is done by removing 3 screws. You've got 2 at the front, 1 at the back, and with the tender body off, here is the 21 pin DCC socket where there's plenty of room for a decoder. Weirdly, there is a capacitor connected up to the circuit board here. Maybe that's intended as a bit of a sort of electrical flywheel, perhaps. But looking at the capacitor, it's not going to keep a motor running for any amount of time, so I don't know what it's there for. It's not smoothing lighting. Maybe it's there just to support the decoder against very brief power outages. I don't know, but that's a weird one. And then no speaker pre-fitted, unfortunately, and if you want to fit one, you've actually got to sacrifice these weights from inside the tender, which is not great. Again though, more modern Bachmann locos are quite a bit better than this. And then the back-to-back gauging comes in at 14.2mm back-to-back, which is slightly below the standard, but that is pretty much where most models sit these days, and that allows locos to handle curves quite nicely. So yeah, definitely a mixed bag where performance is concerned. I like the number of pickups, I like the proper bearings on the driving axles, not too keen on the sort of motor setup though. But anyway, let me show you the performance. So as you can see, it lives, it is alive, and it is a nice smooth runner, I have to say. These Bachmann 3-pole motors, I think I've said in the past, they are about the best of the 3-pole motors. So while I do think 5-pole motors can outperform them quite easily, you don't tend to see that many 3-pole motors doing better than this. So yeah, nice and smooth. Let me show you 50% speed. It's quite sensibly geared, I would say, this one. Here it is at half power. And at full power, it's really got some oomph to it. So yeah, I would say it's sensibly geared. The torque, though, is not the greatest. If I put my fingers here and go up to 50... there you go. You can see it's trying, and I can feel quite a bit of pushing on my finger there, but as you can see, it does slow right down. So yeah, not the greatest torque in that motor, and I think it is the motor because everything else, the bearings and such, that's all pretty good. Okay, let's have a look at the crawl then. You ready? Let's see what this is like. Turning this up slowly. Turning up. Still turning. So again, I'm at about 20 there. So again, that suggests we've not got brilliant efficiency in this motor. I'm still turning. Where am I now? Getting close to 30. Oh, there we go. But as you can see, it is moving pretty slowly. Now, it's not a dreadfully smooth motion. You can tell that it's a 3-pole motor because you can see it kind of jerk forwards. Instead of a more smooth motion, but yeah, it's not bad. Let's see if we can accelerate a bit. Yeah, it's just not dreadfully consistent, is it? Even as I'm turning up, it seems to be a bit hesitant. And now I would say it's smooth. Yeah, let's become smoother. What's it like in reverse? Yeah, I mean, it's really slow and controllable, so that aspect of it is good. Yeah, there you go, look, it's stopped there. Turn it up a bit. I just think the slightly jerky motion is a touch unrealistic. Again, I'm very spoiled because I've seen locos that can do this smoothly. This one's not bad, but yeah, it does kind of stop occasionally and jerk a fair bit. But once it gets to this sort of speed, it looks really, really good. So yeah, decent performer. I have tested the tractive effort of this, and it comes in at 0.47 newtons, which is more than I measured for this in the past. I don't know why that is. I mean, I have cleaned the wheels and serviced this since then, so I don't know, perhaps the wheels were oily from the factory, I don't know. But yeah, that should be about 28 coaches on straight and level track. I think for a loco that's smaller than a Black 5, that's definitely not too bad. So I've set up quite a big train of open wagons here. There's an LMS brake van on the back as well, which you'll see in a second. So let's test the couplings and let's see how this gets on with a load. All right, backing up. And yeah, smooth or not, I should be able to couple nice and precisely with this. Okay, let's observe realistic coupling etiquette. So a brief stop and then a push together. Very slowly. Well, nice click there, so I can hear that they've gone together. And yep, they are coupled, so very, very functional couplings. All right, so this loco, not the greatest on torque. How is this going to perform with a load? Is it going to slow down on those curves? Well, it might be touch and go. Let's see. Let's get it going. Let's go for about 40, I think, because it is a freight train after all. And yeah, shifting those at the moment without any issues at all. So I've got some other Stanier locos out today, plus an odd one out, so if you can spot which one that is, do comment down below. On the middle line, which I'd got set in the wrong direction, I've got the new Hornby Black 5, which I've mentioned a fair bit today. Yeah, quite a bit larger, but lighter than the Stanier Mogul. That is a surprise. And she's got a small passenger train today. And then on the inside line, I've got the Stanier tank. It's the 4P tank, I believe. Where is it? Here it comes. Yeah, you don't often think of Stanier for his tanks, but there were one or two. There we go. Right, let's catch up with the Mogul, see how that's getting on. Alright, so it's going nice and lively at the moment. Let's observe it around the curves. Yeah. As expected then, bit of a slowdown around those. Nothing too dramatic though. It's not slowing down to a crawl or anything, but yeah, we've definitely seen locos with better torque. But do you know what, overall, I really quite like this. I do quite enjoy no-frills engines like this. I think if Bachmann were to bring this back and want us to pay over £200 for it or something like that, then I would not be happy at all, because this is a pretty basic model that I don't think is worth anything like that. But if it came back at, say, £100 to £150, this would make a fantastic budget offering. A lot of the people that say they don't care about sprung buffers or lights in the cab or extra fancy frills like that would probably be quite pleased by models like this, because they look great without breaking the bank. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that. Again though, provided the asking price is reasonable, and quite often that's not the case. But I don't know really whether Bachmann are going to bring this back. I've certainly not heard anything like that. It is quite odd that they only did the one release of this for 2017 and then haven't brought it back since. So maybe it is due another release, I don't know. And there's no telling what they would do with a future release. Would they upgrade it? Would they just upgrade the price? I don't know. It'd be interesting. But yeah, for what it is, I quite enjoy this. I've seen better runners, I've seen better detailed locos, I've seen better value models. But for what it is, for a relatively obscure loco, I think they did a pretty decent job of it. Let's have some ratings then for Bachmann's Stanier Mogul. So level of detail I've given 3-star, which is a lower score than I gave this last time. And the reason for that is things have obviously advanced quite a bit since I last reviewed this, and this model's been left behind a little bit. Having said that, the basics are all there. So the paintwork looks absolutely fantastic. The sort of separately fitted details and other detailing across the model looks great. It's a very nicely presented loco, but the cab detail is really quite a bit behind what you'd see on a newly released loco, I think. Pretty chunky details, no lighting or anything like that, no paintwork on the gauges. Doesn't come with lamps or anything like that, that's a feature we see these days. No sprung buffers, no matte effect on the smoke box either. So yeah, a few things missing on this, but really the basics, like I say, are there. Performance I've given 4-star. Generally speaking, it is a pretty decent performer, especially considering it's running on just a 3-pole motor. At the slow speeds, it is a pretty good crawler, but it's not that consistent, a little bit coggy. Again, 5-pole motor I think would have improved that. And also the torque isn't the greatest. It's not the most powerful loco. It doesn't slow down too badly on curves though, actually, which is why I've not knocked it down more than this. But yeah, it's not quite a 5-star performer, but it's pretty darn good. Pulling power 0.47 newtons, that's more than I measured for this last time, so I don't know, maybe I'd more recently cleaned the track this time, maybe I misread the measurement last time, but yeah, 0.47 newtons, 28 coaches on straight and level track. That's actually more than the new Hornby 9F, which is not bad. So yeah, actually very good pulling power. Mechanism for me is just a 3-star. Now again, it does have the basics. It's got plenty of pickups, it's got the proper bearings on the driving axles, and it is nice and serviceable. On the downside though, it's got that awful drawbar, really annoying to work with that. It's also got just a 3-pole motor without a flywheel. Obviously, we've seen much better performance than this with locos that have a 5-pole motor and the flywheel. Pity about that. Quality though, I've given 4.5 star. Generally, it's a really high quality model. So there's lots of metal on board, heavy die-cast chassis, front of the boiler completely packed with weight, and of course the die-cast running plate as well. The build quality is also very high, except for that pretty noticeable glue splodge on the builder's plate. So I have knocked it off 0.5 star for that. Can't give it 5, I don't think, looking as it does. But yeah, that's a pretty good fair score, I think. Right, value for money then, you'll have to take this with a pinch of salt because obviously the prices I've got are quite out of date. But in 2019, the RRP was £159.95, which would make this pretty reasonable, I think, by 2024 standards, though I'm sure it'd be more like 200 if Bachmann were to bring this back. And I paid a heavily discounted price of £106 back in the day. Again, today that would be absolutely superb. So I've given it 4 star. Bear in mind, if this comes back, it'll probably be much more expensive than that. But yeah, for the price I paid, it's not a bargain or anything because it is pretty cut back in terms of features, but it is certainly better value than a lot of today's models, I think. So overall, that is 7.67 out of 10, or a grade of D. Yeah, I think it needed a bit more detail, high quality mechanism, that kind of thing, to get the higher grades. But yeah, it's certainly not terrible at all. Into the logbook then, and it is 15th place, just above the Hornby Railroad Plus Class 20 and below Rapido's Metropolitan E-Class. Yeah, it's a pretty obscure loco this, and if it's something that interests you, overall I think, yeah, if you can find it for a reasonable price, this is something I could recommend. Alright then folks, well thank you so much for watching. That will just about do it for my review of Bachmann's Stanier Mogul. Do let me know what you thought about this. And if you've got one of the Bachmann Stanier Moguls, what did you think about it? Were you pleased with the level of detail and features, or did you find that this was lacking a little bit? I do think in 2017, when this was new, it didn't appear to be lacking as much as it does today, of course, looking at this through 2024 eyes. So do bear that in mind. Obviously, age is not something Bachmann can help with older releases, although they would be able to help it if they re-released this. But yeah, overall I'm pretty impressed with this thing. It still looks great and the performance is certainly more than adequate. So thank you once again for watching, you take care, and I'll see you again very, very soon for another review. Alright, cheers folks, you take care.